Okay, it is the end of the traditional school year for a lot of you. Not for me, I homeschool year round, but you still kind of get that end of year feeling when it gets to May. And so I want to talk to you not about finishing strong, but the fact that some of you might feel like you need to homeschool over the summer. And what does that look like? And do you really need to homeschool everything over the summer? Can you pick and choose? And how do you do that practically? So let's dive into this topic of homeschooling over the summer. For those of you who are new to the channel, I'm Amy Roberts from raisingarrows.net, and here on YouTube and also with my podcast and my blog, I talk about all things large family homemaking and homeschooling. You can find lots and lots of resources there to help you in your quest of homeschooling, and this is one of those resources that you can find on the blog. I have a podcast on it, and I also have a blog post on it, but I've never done an actual video on the topic of homeschooling over the summer. This came up several years ago when I had a reader ask me if it was even possible to homeschool over the summer to get their child caught up for public school. And I thought, this would be a great opportunity to explain how you might be able to do that. And also for people who homeschool all the time, what that might look like as well, especially if you aren't already homeschooling over the summer and you don't want to take the entire summer away from your child, but you also know that you need to catch up on some things as well. So first of all, to answer the question, can you homeschool an entire subject or even an entire grade over the summer? The answer is absolutely, but it's going to take some very concerted, focused effort. And so it's not going to be this simple, you throw a bunch of stuff in front of your kids and you hope that they figure it out. It's going to really take some focused energy from you as a parent. And honestly, homeschooling a subject or two over the summer as opposed to trying to get an entire year's worth of grade level material is going to be easier. But a lot of times when you hear about a child being behind, it's usually in certain subjects, right? It's a lot of times it's math or it's reading or it's something along those lines. It's not really everything. And so when you go to try to get them caught up, you're catching them up in very specific things because a lot of other things can be caught up later or they aren't that important. If you have a child who's not reading very well, that's super important because the world opens up for a child who can read. And so it might be the phonics and the remedial literature and things like that that you need to focus on, as opposed to everything from science to social studies to fine arts to math and phonics. It may not be all of that. So that will help you out some to determine exactly what needs to be schooled over the summer and not try to do it all. I also need to caveat this with the fact that catching up via public school curriculum and catching up via homeschool curriculum are two very different animals. We know as homeschoolers that we can catch up and do that throughout the course of the year and not have to get it all squeezed into 2 or 3 months in the summer. But if you are public schooling and you're wanting to catch up over the summer, you are going to need to do so according to the public school's plans. You aren't going to be able to just willy-nilly try to figure it out on your own. You will need to be schooling exactly what they say your child needs to have in order to go to the next grade. And in addition to that, your child is probably going to need to be tested again in order to show that they have learned the things that you have tried to school them with over the summer. This is one reason that you may just want to do summer school, but I have to be honest, I'm not a fan of summer school because I feel like it doesn't really give a solid education. It's sort of a band-aid over a bigger problem. And I'd encourage you, even if you're a public school parent, to dig a little deeper and to spend a little more time and effort in actually getting your child past just the Band-Aid stage and actually getting them mastery level of some of the things that they are struggling with. And this may mean you need to get another tutor, you need to get another curriculum, you need to get more hours in the day to focus on them. And that is going to just depend on how far behind your child is and how much effort is going to be required in order to catch them up. But definitely, if you are a public schooler looking to put your child back into public school, you need to follow those guidelines. And now I'm going to speak a little bit more though to the homeschooler who feels like their child is behind and they want to use the summer months to do some catching up, because that is actually more in my wheelhouse of how to deal with that as opposed to the public school system. All right, so let's get super honest here. Why does your child need to catch up? Is catching up actually necessary for your child? Or is there something else behind the scenes that this catching up has to do with? Do they need to take a test and you're feeling very worried about that? Do you feel like you have not had the consistency and now you are causing them to be behind? Is there pressure coming from someone else? Maybe a grandparent who is suggesting that your child is behind a certain learning curve. Whatever the case may be, you need to make certain that your reason for trying to homeschool subjects or an entire grade over the summer months is not because you're fearful or because somebody else is pressuring you. Because the fact of the matter is 3 months is not long enough. As I mentioned earlier, it's not long enough for mastery. It's long enough to put a Band-Aid on it and move forward, but that is not really what homeschooling is all about. Homeschooling does help children to master subjects. Instead of digging an inch deep and a mile wide, you want to help your child focus on digging deeper into subjects, giving them a better understanding of it so that they can move forward and not have just superficial knowledge of a little bit of everything. So you might actually want to be more focused on catching up along the school year and doing a little bit of extra and digging a little bit deeper. One thing I would encourage you to do is take the individual pieces of whatever it is that your child is struggling with and really dig deep into them. For instance, I noticed that a couple of my kids were struggling with multiplication tables. Rather than just continuing to push through, we actually took about 2 months off from math, might have been more like 4 months off from their traditional math, and we just drilled multiplication facts until they got to the place where they were very comfortable with their multiplication facts. And then they breezed right through the next several grades worth of math with no trouble whatsoever. It was really the multiplication facts that were holding them up. And so it might be something like that. It might be just a piece of something that you need to focus on throughout the coming school year, rather than trying to really buckle down over the summer and bust through all of it. And the summer might be a really good time for something like that with the multiplication drills, or maybe you're going to focus in on really getting one of your children reading solidly because you know the next year you're going to need them to be a little more independent. So doing things like that really are helpful over the summer, but you may need to come out with this with the idea that you're going to catch up along the way. You're not going to just dive in and try to do it all during the summer, that you really have time. And if you're feeling like your child is not hitting certain scope and sequence that are traditional school scope and sequence, I would also encourage you to take a step back from that and realize that those kinds of skills can actually be taught sequentially as you go, and they will never actually be behind. They may be behind according to, like I said, a scope and sequence chart for first grade, but that's not something that has to be done in the first grade. If you see that your child is lacking in certain skills and you need to hone those first, do that first. then move forward, even if it's second grade or third grade. Not every child needs to read in kindergarten. In fact, I'd say a lot of kids don't need to read in kindergarten. That is a skill that can be taught sequentially as they get older, and you will actually have a child who's a much better reader than just glossing over the surface, putting band-aids on everything as you go. You actually will have a very solid reader if you take things a little bit slower. Okay, let's dive into the practical stuff. Number one, you need to decide what subjects actually need to be taken over the summer. We've talked a little bit about this because it may not be everything that has to be done. There may be definite gaps in things that you need to try to fix. Now, if you think you've got gaps all over the places, I would really encourage you to check out my video on homeschooling gaps, because I think it'll maybe calm you down a little bit to realize that gaps are kind of part of education. And if you teach your child how to learn and love learning, those gaps are not a big deal. So definitely check out that video. But if you know that you want to focus in on some difficulties that your child is having in specific subjects, figure out what those specific subjects are, and then only do those subjects because you need to have some focused effort on that. Don't try to add a bunch of extra things in. And typically this is going to be math and reading. As I mentioned before, those tend to be the places where kids really get stuck on things. You may find that you also need to teach toward a prerequisite. So sometimes you have classes in college, or maybe your child's going to be taking a class at a local public or private school, and they need a prerequisite, something that they have already taken so that they have the foundation for another class. This might include a test to make sure that they are on level. It might just be a chit chat with the teacher or professor to make sure that they have the foundation that they need, but you might need to use the summer to put together kind of a prerequisite class to get them the foundation that they need. And that might be in something that's not math or phonics. Obviously, phonics is not going to be something that your child needs to go to college. Hopefully they've already figured that out by the time they are taking college classes. But all that said, you might need some sort of history or some sort of science foundation. And so you want to focus in on that over the summer months. But the name of the game here is to make sure that you are not overburdening your plate. Don't add more than is absolutely necessary. Number two, plan your scope and sequence. The easiest way to do this is to get online, find out what other people are teaching, what curricula teaches, and the order that it teaches it in, and then fashion your curricula, or however you're going to do this, after that scope and sequence. Once you have determined what a traditional scope and sequence looks like, you can remove the things that are going to be a waste of your child's time. If they already know a certain facet of that scope and sequence, don't do it over again unless they need that foundation work. But you can take that out. You can leave that out, or you can just do a quick little glance at it and move forward. From there, you can decide how many days a week, how many hours a day it's going to take to work through that scope and sequence that you have prepared. Step three, you also need to decide on a curriculum. What are you going to use, or what method are you going to use in order to teach these subjects? At the end of this video, I will give you a few ideas that I personally think work great for summer curriculum, so stay tuned for that. Okay, step number four, you're gonna have to clear your schedule. That means you may have to give up the summer swimming lessons. You may have to give up some of the events and projects and things like that that you typically do in the summer, all in the name of education. Realize that this isn't forever, and it's just while you're focusing in on getting your child through these things. And guess what? As a reward for all your hard work, I would definitely plan something to do at the end of all of this that is fun and does just sing summer. Step number five, be consistent. This is going to be so crucial to your child's success. You have to get them day in and day out, sitting down, even if it's just a concerted 1 or 2 hours a day. You need to be consistent, and that's why you need to clear your schedule. You are committing to this, and if your child is older, They are committing to this and they need to be responsible for that, but you need to check up on them. You can't just walk away. Typically, an older child has gotten to this point where they're behind because there has been some lack of responsibility. So you do need to stay on them, not nagging, not being irritating, but just making sure that they are working at a steady pace and that you're available for questions if they have anything that they just aren't understanding. They need to know that you're in this with them. Lastly, you need to plan some rewards. I mentioned this just a little bit ago, but you definitely need to plan in some rewards and let your child know what those rewards are going to be. Rewards are such motivation when it comes to things like this. When you don't really want to be there, they don't really want to be there, but you know that you need to push through this. Having something at the end of it all that is a celebration is so crucial. And you can break this down into little bits. Say you have a family pizza party after your child has finished reading these 3 chapters and they've done the test. Break it up into those little bitty pieces. Maybe halfway through the plan, you go to the water park as a family. Maybe you get them a new app or a toy they've been wanting along the way when they hit some milestones. You are incentivizing the work that they are doing and you are celebrating their accomplishments. Make sure you have something big at the end of it all, even if it's just a day out trip or something like that with mom. However you want to do it, it can be such a great way to spend time with your child and to motivate them if you make sure you have built-in rewards along the way. Okay, let's talk briefly here about summer school curriculum options. The first thing I want to say though is do not try to use a boxed curriculum where it's like the whole grade level in 1 year. That is going to be really hard for you to pull apart pieces of that. They're great for the whole year to follow, but they're not real great for crash coursing certain subjects. So stay away from a boxed curriculum that has a whole bunch of subjects for an entire year. You're going to need to piecemeal this out. I'd also encourage you to really think outside the box. This can actually be kind of fun. I know school fun in the summer, that sounds crazy, but it really can be. For instance, you could choose video resources. Compass Classroom has some really great video resources, especially for junior high and high school, that would be fantastic for crash coursing in the summer. YouTube has videos that you can look up and put onto a playlist for your child to work through. Khan Academy has options where there's videos that go along with the lesson. So definitely video resources will help keep your child engaged. Workbooks are also a great way, especially if your child is needing something very specific. For instance, we are currently using Kuman workbooks for multiplication. I have a child who is needing to focus on her multiplication facts. She finished up her one workbook for math, and now we're going to move into just focusing on the multiplication facts so that she has that foundation. You can get workbooks at the grocery store and just use those to work through the foundational elements that your child needs, particularly in math. These are really good for math. You can look up book lists. If your child is needing to do more on the literature and reading side, look up book lists. Start with levels that are below, have them read to you, work through like some questions that would help them do some reading comprehension, and then move them up on the list as you see that they are definitely getting it in these particular grade levels. And honestly, if you can get them reading really good on a grade level that's just 1 or 2 below them, they will have that foundation to then build off of. And then you can start moving them up. Don't race through it. Don't try to get them going as quickly as possible. You, again, want them to have that mastery, not that inch deep and mile wide stuff. You really want them to understand this, particularly when it comes to things like math and phonics. Another thing we have done in the past is use handbooks, and this is particularly good when it comes to grammar. Get them a Beacon handbook or an MLA guideline or something along those lines and have your child crash course grammar and writing in the summer months. A child who can write well is going to do leaps and bounds above a child who cannot. And so just crash coursing through a handbook is a really great way to get your child, especially between junior high and high school, get them writing well. Hopefully these are some ideas that have really helped you. If you have specific questions for me, leave them down in the comments section. And don't forget to like and subscribe this channel, because I have lots of content like this where I'm just helping you walk through this homeschooling journey. And definitely check out all of the homeschooling resources I have on raisingarrows.net. We'll see you next time.